Phil Rucker, let's talk a little bit about this piece that you have today in the Washington Post, which focuses in on this label of racist that many Democrats are, of course, applying to this president. And you write, quote, that the president is vexed by a branding crisis of his own, how to shed this label of racist. The risk for Trump is that the pejorative that has long dogged him becomes defining. How is it that the president's surprised by this label, considering the things that he is willing to say in public?
Yeah, Casey, that's a good question. I'm not sure, actually, that he's so surprised by it as much as he's just angry about it and frustrated that he's being called a racist. But it's not just a political label that his Democratic opponents are using. It's actually the truth right now. I mean, the tweets that he had, the attacks he had against the 4 congresswomen of color were plainly racist, as have a number of comments that he's made and actions that he's taken for decades now in his career as a real estate mogul, as a sort of a celebrity provocateur and reality television host, and now as a politician and a president. And so the trouble here is that this language continues, and it continues in such a sort of heightened way with world focus that this label becomes defining. It becomes part of who he is as he seeks re-election, and that's the challenge that he and his advisors are grappling with.
And on Friday, he talked about how his political opponents were using this word and tried to defend himself. Let's take a look.
For them to throw out the race word again, racist, 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 that's all they use to anybody. They call Nancy Pelosi a racist. She's not a racist. They call anybody a racist when they run out of cards. I'm winning in the polls. They're desperate. They've got lousy candidates. They got bad candidates.
I mean, Phil, I sort of feel the need to just fact check that a little bit. I mean, this is not, as you point out, there are very specific instances that we can point to where the president has said things that are this way.
That's exactly right, Casey. And, look, this is the reality, because this is the part of a strategy that Trump has had to use these sort of racial divisions, to use even overtly racist language at sometimes to mobilize and galvanize his white supporters, to get them to turn out at the polls. It's one of the reasons why he kept hitting those Democratic congresswomen so hard. It's one of the reasons why he attacked the city of Baltimore over so many days, and it's Congressman Elijah Cummings, who's one of the top ranked black Democrats in the House. And, you talk to the president's advisors, and they try to make an argument that this could maybe backfire on the Democrats and help Trump, because some of his supporters could view the label of racist as an attack against themselves. But it's unclear how that might work exactly. We've not really had in the modern time somebody who's sort of so identified with racism and as a racist go on to win majority support in this country.
Well, and certainly it's also starting to have, Jeremy Peters, real-world consequences, as you point out in a story that helps us explore even further this thesis that Ashley and Phil have in the Washington Post. You found a real connection between the words that are being used among the president's supporters, particularly in conservative media, and what showed up in that manifesto that's linked to the alleged gunman in the El Paso shooting. We pulled together, or I should say the New York Times video team pulled together some examples of this to underscore your reporting. Let's show that, and then I'll ask you about it.
We're being invaded. The invasion of illegal immigrants.
The fact of the matter is that this is an attempted invasion of our country.
We had all these minors from Central America flooding the border.
Multiculturalism isn't real. This is really destroying one culture and replacing it with the new foreign culture.
This is not migrants coming into the country. This is nothing short of an invasion.
Democrats who want to replace you, the American voters, with newly amnestied citizens.
So, Jeremy, what did you find when you lined all that up with what we heard from the gunman?
Casey, I think this is really an example of how words on their own can speak volumes. And when you take the El Paso shooters manifesto and you lie it side by side with the transcripts from Fox News shows, from Rush Limbaugh's program, from other various conservative news outlets, you see a remarkable degree of overlap in terms of the dehumanizing and demonizing language that they use to describe immigrants. They're called invaders. They are treated like a hostile enemy force, something that, in the words of Ann Coulter, could be shot. You have people who are saying, like Tucker Carlson has, that the whole point of this migration is to replace American citizens, and by that he means mostly white American citizens. And that, I think, was the most striking example of how the real fringe white nationalist right thinking has crept into mainstream conservative thought. This idea that this conspiracy theory, really, of white genocide, that there's going to be this great replacement, as it's called, of migrants from other countries replacing American citizens, and here in Europe as well, that is not a mainstream idea, or at least was not until recently. Yet, if you turn on Fox News primetime, you hear it uttered by their hosts. And if you flip to the Shooter's Manifesto, it's right there in the first paragraph. Now, cause and effect is a tricky thing, but as I said, you lie these things side by side, the manifesto and the transcripts of these shows, and it is quite chilling.
Well, and is it the president who's mainstreaming it?
I think it's both. I don't really think it's a one-way street here, Casey. I think the president sometimes picks up on language that he hears, ideas, stories, themes he hears on Fox News. Like, remember the infamous incident that supposedly happened in Sweden, that no one in Sweden could really tell you what it was. So there's that. But then there's also instances of Fox News hosts and other in conservative media adopting the president's language. I think the best example of that is fake news. So the cumulative result is that there's this cacophony of toxic language, much of it racially tinged, and it's really created a political discourse that I think most people find quite depressing, if not dangerous.
Yeah. And Phil Rucker, this, of course, all these stories and this conversation that we're having coming as the president is spending a week basically by himself at Bedminster, or rather talking with friends on vacation. What are you looking for or potentially expecting from the president, considering all the free time?
Well, we'll stay tuned to Twitter, I guess, Casey. But look, he's in Bedminster, New Jersey at his golf club for the week. It's sort of his annual summer vacation. He is doing some work. And on Thursday, we'll be going to New Hampshire, to Manchester, New Hampshire, for a campaign rally that evening. I'm going to be looking to see how much he continues some of these attacks that we saw flare up all throughout last week. It was a week that began with a call for unity and bringing the country together after these mass shootings, and it devolved into one attack after another. And, we know the president likes to be in fighting mode on the campaign trail, so we'll see how this week goes.
Indeed we will. All right, Kelly, Phil, Jeremy, thank you all very much for starting us off tonight.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.